Right before the peak of their popularity, Rare would start a small fighting series, Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct obviously took a lot of influence from Mortal Kombat, which was also hitting its stride at the time. The game used pre-rendered graphics, had a fair amount of gore, and violent finishers, although performed in the form of combo enders as opposed to being their own moves. The success of Killer Instinct was enough to eventually earn a sequel, which we'll be talking about today. Killer Instinct 2, unlike its inspiration or predecessor, would focus far more heavily on combos, so much so that most people only know the game through its iconic combo breaker line. The game would also receive a port to the N64 as Rare's first game on the console, named Killer Instinct Gold, which due to the N64's wonderful cartridges would receive numerous changes, graphical downgrades, the removal of the FMV cutscenes, new modes, and various other changes for better and worse, but we'll come back to that in a bit. Killer Instinct 2 was also going to be ported to the Super Nintendo, like the first game was, and the port was finished due to contractual obligations, but due to the release of the Nintendo 64, the game was shelved and never saw the light of day. Killer Instinct 2 would eventually hit Xbox One as part of the Killer Instinct Reboot's second season pass as Killer Instinct 2 Classic, while Gold would reach the same console through Rare Replay, which is how I'll be playing both of these games today because obviously I don't have a Killer Instinct 2 arcade machine. While this section is technically the Killer Instinct 2 Classic section, everything here also applies to Gold, where Gold, which will be covered separately, being a home console port, has some extra bells and whistles. The game is obviously a fighting game, and as such it plays like most other fighting games. Each player has 2 health bars, they are put on opposite sides of the screen, and they fight until only one is left standing. The game is very combo heavy, with a simple and consistent combo flow for all characters. Heavy specials flow into medium regulars, into medium specials, into light normals, and so on. Most specials at that point turn into combo enders with various attributes. Depending on the length of the combo, they'll be graded with different titles. Ending with certain combos, either ones unique to the character or the stage, result in a kill as well, which determines endings in Killer Instinct 2, and in Gold it's just flashy. Combos can be done manually or automatically, with automatic combos essentially just being a buffer system for combos. The buffer system isn't overly generous and hits a nice balance, but whether it's me or the game, I did have troubles with my inputs seeming to get eaten at times, resulting in me doing pretty random actions. An opponent's combos can be broken during links using combo breakers, with punching combos being broken with a combo breaker inputted with a kick and vice versa. The game adds a super meter, like all fighting games were at the time, which allows the use of super moves at the cost meter, which can be mixed into combos as well. The game also adds throws, which somehow the first game didn't think to have. By blocking, holding back, and pressing light punch, the player can also perform a parry, which breaks blocked combos and stuns the opponent, allowing for retaliation. All these new systems have one purpose in mind, shitting on defensive play and rewarding offensive play, despite the fact that combo breakers still exist, which are the peak of defensive play. Combo breakers are kind of a pussy mechanic for semi-free neutral resets. Performing combos feels good, and the system feels natural, although it's far from the deepest fighting game ever made. I'm no expert at fighters. In fact, despite how bad of an idea it is to do it on a game this old and irrelevant, this is really one of my first times truly trying to get good, which the game isn't particularly friendly to even on its home console version. Characters are sufficiently distinct to give it some variety, but the simple combo system does create some sameness between everyone. Another very minor aspect is something a lot of fighting games were playing with at the time. Certain stages allow for rotation in the background or foreground caused by certain attacks. The game is still played on a 2D plane, so this doesn't change much, and I don't think it can even be used to evade attacks in any way like it can be in Soul Calibur. But since stages have varied shapes, it can sometimes change the effective size of the playing field. And on the same note, most stages have minor destructible or interactive elements, like breakable walls or rocks. These don't deal damage when broken or cause stun or anything like that, they're just fun little flares for certain stages. As far as control goes, I played both games on Xbox One, 2 is part of Killer Instinct 2013, and Gold is part of Rare Replay. I can't speak for how either is played on its original hardware, but these ports play very well, they're perfectly standard fighting controls. Although I imagine the game is not optimal to play on the N64 as part of Killer Instinct Gold. The game has 5 difficulty options as well, very easy, easy, normal, hard, and very hard. Easy is about my level, but I'm capable of pushing through normal. I'm bad at fighting games, but I found the game still decently challenging, even on easy. I got a lot better at fighting games in general as I played, but I still struggled. Yeah, I can be really mean and will resort to really cheap shit like spamming leg sweeps or projectiles. The presentation is decent. The pre-renders are pretty impressive for the time, especially on the characters, and the stages look pretty good too. The stages are all FMVs in Killer Instinct 2, which makes them look very crisp, although most of the cutscene FMVs using endings are only a few seconds long, which makes them feel a little cheap. They look decent for the time, but they're not much more than generic animations with text over them. The bigger issue is the character designs themselves can be pretty iffy. The Inhuman characters look pretty damn good, like Saberwolf and Spinal, but some of these characters look pretty rough. The human characters are all buttery, yellow, and waxy. Maya's tits defy gravity. Kim Woo feels a little racist to me, and her blue eyes and red hair don't exactly scream half Chinese. The final boss, Gargos, he's a little rough looking too. He's kind of just flat, basically being one giant flat color with very few features. The music is all really good, made even better by having panic remixes that play when a character's health gets low, as well as a little ending flair to them when a match ends. The announcer also makes everything a lot more satisfying when he just comes out and screams combo breaker, or comes out and screams hyper combo. It's great. In both versions of the game, the story is the same. The defeat of the villain Idol at the end of the first game causes a time warp that sends all the characters the developers wanted to stay in the game 2,000 years back, while the other characters are wholly abandoned. Some have explanations. Cinder died, Idol died, Riptor died, but Thunder is just awkwardly left in the future, I guess. Also, some of the returning characters aren't the same, but awkward replacements of old characters, somewhat like Sub-Zero in Mortal Kombat, but they do it 4 times. The new villain Gargos escapes Limbo and starts a tournament for the honor of fighting him for some reason. Not really sure why they're fighting for the chance to go after Gargos instead of all teaming up and gang beating him, but I guess that's what the cool guys call ludonarrative dissonance. Also, as there was never a Killer Instinct 3, which endings are canon is completely debatable. It's most likely Jago and Orchard's endings, because they're more or less the main good guys of the series. Also important to note, each character has 4 or more endings depending on certain factors throughout their game. Typically, these factors are if they kill certain characters with hyper combos. Anyway, with all that setup out of the way, let's move on to the characters, who are of course the same in both versions, starting with the returning, then doing the new. Black Orchid is a special agent for the US military, looking to take down Ultratech. Ultratech being the company that organized the first Killer Instinct tournament that is evil. She's somewhat derivative of the female ninja from Mortal Kombat, Katana Jade, and so on. Her artwork from the games pretty prominently features her ass front and center, which is funny. Killer Instinct 2 reveals that Orchid was the winner of the first Killer Instinct tournament, killing Idol and accidentally causing the time warp that leads to this game's events, while her endings all center on the reveal that Jago is her brother. Her factors are killing Jago and killing Saberwolf. If she kills both, she's sad she has no brother. If she only kills Jago, she's sad and dead. If she only kills Saberwolf, she's reunited with her brother, and if both are alive, her and Jago kill Saberwolf. Orchid plays very similarly to Jago, who we'll cover in a second. She has a slide that's really good for starting combos, although it lacks the range or damage of Jago's. She's a bit more kick-heavy, as her uppercut, performed with the same motion as Jago's, requires a kick as opposed to a punch. Her other kick special is a cartwheel that can rack up good numbers for combos and chains into itself very well. She also has a fireball just like Jago, and even a somewhat equivalent move to his sword slash. If Jago is Ryu, Orchid is Ken basically. Her ability to keep combos going is impressive, even if she slightly struggles with beginning them, but it's pretty hard not to see her as a lesser Jago for the most part. Orchid's stage is helipad. Despite its appearance, it's very narrow. On the left side are exploding barrels just for flair. It's mediocre, but her song, which has a vocal track to it, is really fucking catchy. Fulgore is an Ultratech robot sent back in time to spread their influence. The Fulgore in this game is not the same as the one in the first game, get ready to hear that a lot, as the first Fulgore was destroyed by Jago. This is basically Fulgore 2.0. In case it wasn't clear enough, Ultratech aren't the good guys. Fulgore's endings are Ultratech taking over the world from the past. If Jagan and Orchid are dead, it goes well. If either or both are alive, not so much. Fulgore's playstyle is something of a zoner, or trying to be, I think. A lot of his abilities fall into the trickier zoning category. He has a teleport that places him behind opponents, although it's pretty slow, meaning it's more of a punish. He has 2 projectiles, a fireball that can be combined with his lock-on move to shoot 3 fireballs at a time, and a laser that targets the ground beneath an opponent that the AI really struggles to deal with. He even has a counter, which really indicates an attempt at a keep-away strategy. His only approach move is a pretty mediocre jab dash to get started with combos, although he can pull off some pretty solid ones once he gets started. They still tend to be pretty short. I don't particularly like Fulgore's playstyle, but I do like the amount of options he has at his disposal. Oh, and he can turn invisible to hide his animations, which doesn't work on the AI, but could potentially be good against the humans. Granted, he loses it when he gets hit. Fulgore's stage is an Ultratech lab called Museum. It's incredibly standard. Even the music is pretty standard, but I like the look of it well enough, I suppose. Glacius is a frost alien, fallen from the sky in the Arctic. This Glacius isn't the same as the one from the first game, who returned home at the end of that game. This is Glacius' ancestor, who also happens to be named Glacius and happened to crash land on Earth looking for kidnapped members of his race. His endings are all about finding and saving his pals and flying back to his people. His factors are killing Saberwolf and breaking open the well on Saberwolf's stage. If he kills Saberwolf and finds the well, he brings his friend home. If he doesn't kill Wolf but finds the well, he gets killed. If he spares Wolf but doesn't find the well, for whatever reason he just gives up on finding his friends and cures Saberwolf instead, which is a hard right turn. And if Saberwolf is dead and the well isn't found, Glacius is lonely. Glacius is probably the best character in the game. Glacius has tons of options in mobility. His uppercut, which already tend to be pretty good as it is on other characters, is also a teleport. He has a projectile, and a good one at that, a command grab that he can follow into literally anything because it stuns opponents after it hits, and tons of follow-ups and variety. Most characters have heavy, medium, and light variations of all their moves, but most of Glacius' moves are wholly unique, giving him option after option to continue and start combos. Even the scant competitive info online seems to indicate that Glacius is incredibly good. There isn't even really one core Glacius playstyle. He seems to fit no niche, he kinda just fills all of them, he can do whatever he wants. Glacius' stage spaceship is way too big. It's good for Glacius because he can teleport and spam projectiles, but for everyone else, especially if they're going up against a character like Glacius, it's just gonna be miserable trying to approach on it. Jago is a Tibetan monk. Here's an image of a Tibetan monk. Here's an image of Jago in his traditional monk skin-tight bodysuit with exposed abs, coronavirus face mask, and fucking katana. His design is obviously based on Mortal Kombat's ninjas, despite the fact that he's apparently a monk, but in play he's kind of this game's Shoto with a fireball, uppercut, and even a flying kick, albeit a less flashy one. Also in the first game he's listed as being full manlet at 5'6", but by Killer Instinct 2 he's apparently 5'9", despite being 21 in the first and 22 in the second. Jago has a tiger spirit living in him apparently, which is what gives him his powers, but at some point it's revealed to actually be Gargos' power. Like everyone else, he's dragged to the past and wants revenge on Gargos. Jago's endings are basically the same as Orchid's. If Fulgore is dead and Orchid is dead, he's lonely. If Orchid lives and Fulgore dies, he's got a sister. If Orchid dies and Fulgore doesn't, he's dead. And if they both live, they team up and kill Fulgore. He's Ryu with a sword. He has a fireball that becomes red in certain circumstances, an uppercut, a long-range flying kick, but he has some unique stuff too, mainly his combo-starting sword swing and a sliding kick. Jago's playstyle is highly aggressive. Anytime Jago's within slide range of an opponent, he should be sliding. At least against the AI, this move is absurdly good. The AI really struggles to deal with the slide. After that, it can be followed into another slide or a sword swing, then eventually a knockdown with an uppercut and starting the whole thing over. His uppercut is another great move because it hits like a goddamn truck, as does his heavy crouching kick leg sweep, which is basically the panic move. When outside of slide range, you can just spam fireballs until the opponent comes back in slide range. The flying kick is also a valid approach and combo starter, although unlike the slide, it's far less safe. The heavy sword swing is an okay combo starter, but considering how safe slide is, the sword swing is pretty much exclusively going to be used as a follow-up, and when used as an ender it has a really cool sword uppercut animation. Killer Instinct 2 doesn't have a tier list, but from the little bit of information I could dig up, Jago is considered one of the best next to Glacius, and it kinda shows when it's so easy to get a good slide in and start a combo that knocks off 25% easy, even with like a mediocre 8 hits. His approach options are super solid, and having a good uppercut just is really valuable in this game. The one thing I hate is that his moves all start and end on diagonals. Diagonal quarter circles are a little more finicky than horizontal or vertical ones, at least for me. Thankfully, Jago doesn't have any real weaknesses. He's a pretty solid all-rounder and is a good character to start on. Besides being good, he's very familiar. He's similar but different to Ryu, which means people with some fighting game experience will probably feel fairly comfortable with him. Jago's stage is Bridge. It's long and narrow, too narrow for rotation shenanigans, and has a special stage finisher that can be done by hitting a character with an uppercut, causing the opponent to fall to their death. It has this nice Tibetan style that makes it really cool and unique, and it has a nice little flair with the bridge shifting and moving during the fight or when a character falls on it. Saberwolf is, as his name implies, a werewolf. His full name is apparently Conrad von Saberwolf. Subtle. He was cursed with lycanthropy and became a werewolf, so the name was just a happy coincidence. His main motivation is to cure himself of the curse. After losing in the first Killer Instinct tournament, he's captured by Ultratech, and after escaping, attempts to get revenge on them at the same time as finding a cure. Sabrewolf's endings all suck. Pretty much no matter what, he doesn't get cured and just lives on miserable and depressed. He is fun to play though, maybe my favorite character. Sabrewolf is a full rushdown character. All of his specials advance and forward, whether it's rolls that hit high, lunges that hit low, or backflips that give forward momentum and serve as an uppercut. All of these moves flow together very cleanly and give Sabrewolf a very strong playstyle of constant movement, made even better by the fact that all of his special moves are done by just mashing left and then right, so it's possible to kind of just go back and forth while going down the combo chain, heavy, medium, light, and flow together into some pretty wacky combos. He's a fantastic character, I love playing as him. Sabrewolf's castle is neat, don't know why it would exist 1,000 years in the past, but the look is nice and macabre to fit Saber's horror theme, and it has a destructible wall that leads to a pretty good balcony area on top of having good music. I mean, most of the stages in this game do, but Sabrewolf's is pretty standout. It's nice. Spinal is also not the first Spinal. I don't know why this plot detail came up so many times. Spinal 1 is dead, Spinal 2 is just a different skeleton that was also revived by Gargos. Or maybe it's Spinal from when he was more recently dead, it's not exactly clear. Spinal is revived by Gargos and fights for him. That's his story. In his ending, he backstabs Gargos and frees himself, which depending on Kim Woo living or dying works out better or worse for him. I'm sure you can imagine how. Spinal's a really odd character. He has a little rushdown, but his rushdown is really limited to his little skeleton slide that's pretty slow. Slow is actually a pretty good description generally, but Spinal has a gimmick too. At the cost of him leaving, he can summon skulls that do something. They unlock a teleport and a projectile to use, but considering he can stack up to 5, they must do something else because they don't seem to go away even when using a teleport or a projectile. Fuck if I know what. More power? Speed? No idea. He also feels slightly more frail than the rest of the characters, going down easier, but that might just be my imagination. His stage ship is the opposite of Glacius's. It's tiny, there's no escape. It's a great stage for rushdown characters, and a Viking ship of skeletons is a pretty cool theme too. It's a very solid stage, but the music is really repetitive. It's probably the worst song in the game. TJ Combo is Jax. He's an African American who punches things and fist pounds the ground to make earthquakes. Instead of a soldier, he's just a very American man. Look at those clothes and his American flag wife beater. He's just Killer Instinct Jax. Much like all the good guy characters, Jax is back in time and fighting Ultratech. In the first game, he joined Killer Instinct to become world champion after being caught cheating, and in his endings, he becomes the champion with varying amounts of respect depending on Tusk living or dying. But unlike Jax, he's a charge character, and a very slow one at that. Combo's charge moves almost all help him approach, but look at this running punch. A stop sign could evade that. I don't like charge characters as it is. It's a little too elaborate and slow for me. Even when charging during combos, it all feels a little too slow, although it's nice that his combos are made to switch back and forth between directions to avoid getting too stupid. I hate charge characters. I think it's safe to say that TJ Combo is probably the worst character in this game from my fairly limited experience. Also, weird note, but Combo's AI in arcade is one of the most obnoxious. The devs apparently didn't know how to make him good, so once he has a health lead, he'll just timer stall and turtle. He's really not fun to go against. On the other hand, Street, his stage, has amazing light hip-hop music. The lighting is really cool and moody, and it's a very unique theme for the game. The foreground can sometimes fuck with the camera angle, but it's pretty rare. The real question is, why is there a New York street and subway in the distant past? This takes place in the year 50, and for some reason there's a hip-hop street. That's all the returning characters. Now let's move on to the new characters, starting with the game's main antagonist. Gargos is a bland generic demon. He's brownish, plain, almost featureless, outside of glowing yellow eyes and wings. He's also the blandest final boss in fighting games. Look at Bison, look at Gil, now look at Gargos. Gargos' idol, the boss of the first game's mortal enemy. By manipulating Jago pretending to be the tiger spirit within him, Gargos has freed himself up to be the top dog and brought everyone to the past to fight him, for some reason. In his ending, Gargos rules the world because what else would he do? Gargos is normally unplayable, but he can be unlocked with a cheat code. As a boss, he's a monster. He's fast, hits hard, he has a laugh special move he uses when knocking down the player that heals him for roughly 10% health. His fire breath hits through shields, he's a fucking cunt. As a playable character, he's pretty heavily nerfed. He's slow, he doesn't hit much harder than the average character, he's really laggy, and he kinda lacks combos. His only real combo starter is his shoulder rush thing, which is fairly unreliable. As a boss, he doesn't really need long combos, but as a player character, he definitely does. At times, his best combo feels like it's just jumping in and mashing uppercut. The AI knows how to knock him down when he flies, so he can't even cheese well by stalling out the timer flying. As a playable character, his laugh doesn't even restore health, it just reflects projectiles. He's really awful to play, not helped by being unusable outside of arcade mode, so no practice or training on Killer Instinct Gold. Gargos' stage is Dungeon. It's the final stage of arcade mode. Like Jago's stage, it's long and narrow, and it's pretty bland visually, but it has good music. In arcade mode, Gargos is fought here and must be defeated with an ultra combo or uppercut. It's not really a stage property, but a property that's only seen on this stage. Kim Woo's Asian. If her name didn't give it away, she's also gross, buttery yellow and in a china dress. She also uses nunchucks because, of course. Like most new characters, Kim lived in the past and is a martial arts prodigy, chosen to protect her people, and at the end of arcade mode, she returns home with the evil destroyed, with varying amounts of respect depending on if fucking Spinal lives or dies. This game has a lot of samey endings. There's a lot of going back home and earning respect. Kim Woo plays like a less good Jago, and by extension a less good Orchid. She has a lot of similarities, projectiles in multiple speeds, a flying kick for approach, heavy focus on combos. Even her specials use the same awkward diagonal quarter circles. Her combos can get pretty wild, but she's slow and her approaches aren't nearly as reliable. Her flying kick is a touch slower and covers less distance. Most of her moves hit mid, they're easy to block, and her overhead flip, her best approach, is still decently unreliable. That said, she has one unique attribute, for some reason, a roll for her dash that allows free cross-ups on enemies by rolling behind them. It's not really enough to save her, but it is fairly helpful when going against enemies who have laggier attacks. Her stage dojo is a fighting ring on top of a snowy mountain. The theme is pretty cool, but the stock Chinese music is a little much for me. Maya is another attempt at sex appeal. She wears a leopard skin outfit primarily comprised of a magical bikini top that doesn't go around her back and is instead held up by the gravitational field of her giant booba. Like a lot of characters in this game, she's pretty waxy looking, very yellow. She comes from South America and is an Amazon despite being white and having blonde hair. For some reason, despite being queen of the Amazons, her tribe kicks her out when Gargos returns. In her ending, she returns and everyone is happy, and if Tusk lives, she gets married to him. Why make multiple endings if they're all just gonna turn out this samey? Thankfully, she's pretty fun to play though. Much like Saberwolf, all her specials center on back to forward and forward to back specials, so chaining them just becomes a rhythm game of switching left and right and going down the chain to get pretty huge damage. Her damage output is a little lower than Saber's, but she's generally faster and has pretty great approach options. Her basic blade attack hits in weird spots, lunges her forward, she can do these front flips to clear distance. She's another one of my favorites. The jungle stage is fine. The jungle music is a little generic club for my tastes, but I guess throwing in some animal effects makes it fit well enough, and it's got a catchy beat. The final character is Tusk. Conan the Barbarian was popular at the time, so he was put in the game. He's a little generic, but he works as something completely different. Tusk lives as the last member of his people and champion of the gladiator arena, and decides to fight Gargos because demons killed some other people. After killing Gargos in his endings, they usually have him just go back to fighting. If Maya's alive, he marries her, and if TJ Combo is alive, they become rivals in the arena. Tusk's defining attribute is his sword. He has absolutely massive range and is really good at preventing approaches. A good player, not me, could definitely bat off an enemy with his heavy attacks, which also have some really other mean attributes, like his forward heavy hitting mid and low in quick succession, which even messes up the AI most of the time. Outside of that, his stuff is pretty basic. Another flying kick, another lunge attack. His combos don't go as far as other characters, but they hit pretty hard and pretty consistently. Stonehenge, Tusk's stage, is perhaps the most unique from a layout perspective. The stage is laid out as an octagon, which leads to a constant perspective and layer changing, making it constantly rotate as opposed to the square stages everyone else has. There's also one bonus stage not tied to a character that can only be reached with stage select in 2-player mode. Sky is made up of Killer Instinct logos and has no walls. Getting knocked off isn't just an instant round loss, but an instant match loss for some reason. It's very strange. It can only be reached with a cheat code, so I guess it's fine that it's really weird. There's not a lot of meat to Killer Instinct 2 Classic. It's an arcade port, so it's effectively just the arcade mode for the most part. There's a pretty janky practice mode that's just made by locking the player into a fight in arcade mode with only 2 options, AI on or off, and health normal or health low. There's online functionality, but it's very dead now, although given that this game is only available bundled with Killer Instinct 2013 Season 2, I'd guess it was never really alive, when the people who bought that would probably rather play the new and relevant game. That's not to say the game is bad, it's a fun game in general, and the arcade mode is short and sweet enough. The endings are all static FMV images with text, but it's fun enough to bash combos into the AI if you like fighting games, that is. There's also a few extras thrown in. An animation viewer for looking at characters' animations for some reason. I can't really see why anyone would use this. There's also a cutscene viewer which allows the player to modify the ending factors to view every ending without having to go through the game 4+ times. There's also a music player, which is a nice gesture, but YouTube exists. When it comes to legacy, Killer Instinct 2 had a hard life. While it seems to have been successful, its legacy would take a long time to come to fruition. Killer Instinct 3 would never truly happen, probably because Nintendo mostly lost interest in the arcade market and the Microsoft acquisition and the whole series just getting lost in the shuffle, and attempts to make a reboot took ages. In 2007-ish, an attempt was made to revive it for the Xbox 360, a build of which leaked fairly recently online, but until 2013 nothing would come of it, and by the time the reboot launched, Rare was a shell of its former self, with most of the talent that carried it having left the company long ago, and they don't even develop the game. It was just handed to other studios. Killer Instinct 2013 started controversially as well, but seems to have really improved and gotten more well-liked in recent times. Pretty much every character who was in Killer Instinct 2 has reappeared in Killer Instinct 2013 as far as I'm aware, so it certainly has had an impact on the series, but the series hasn't had much of an impact itself. Killer Instinct 2 Gold is good. Its gameplay systems, especially its really simple and flexible combo system, are really fun to mess around with. It's only available bundled with Killer Instinct Season 2, so if you're already into Killer Instinct 2013, you're probably going to have this for free, and if you have that, it's probably something you'd like. It has fantastic music, it has fun stages, most of the characters are fun, save maybe TJ Combo. The combo system is really easy to learn, so it's kind of a good beginner game besides the fact it doesn't have good tutorials. It's dated, it's not competitive, but it's a pretty neat novelty. Even more novel perhaps though is... Killer Instinct Gold maintains the core gameplay of Killer Instinct 2, but is a little more fully featured being a console port. The core gameplay is entirely unchanged. What is changed is mostly visual stuff. Stages are no longer full motion videos, as the N64 couldn't handle them, and are instead recreated as 3D arenas, which are actually pretty faithful and nice looking. Cutscenes are also gone, as are alternate endings. Each character only has one, usually just their best ending from arcade, recreated with character sprites, which is a little shoddy looking. The real make or break is the characters. They're visually a little lower quality, slightly muddy but generally good, but they also have less animation frames, maybe one less for every 3 or 4 frames. Standalone it looks pretty decent actually, but compared to 2 Classic it looks pretty choppy. The music is also a touch compressed. It sounds fucking fantastic on 2 Classic, but coming from the N64, or in this case emulated N64, you can definitely hear a slight loss in quality. Arcade mode is virtually unchanged, fight against every character in a row, including a mirror match at the end, fight Gargos and get an ending. Kinda. Gold is really stingy with endings for whatever reason. Beating the game on very easy ends the game before Gargos and tells the player to play on a higher difficulty to get an ending, which is a lie. Beating it on easy says the same thing but allows the player to fight Gargos. Normal gives the first sentence of the ending. Presumably to get the entirety of the ending, the game needs to be beaten on very hard, but I wasn't good enough to get past hard even once. I know it's to force players to get good, but it's really discouraging to struggle through normal and finally overcome it and just get told to eat shit. There are also various side modes, starting with Team Battle. Each player picks up to 11 characters and fights. Each character is a stock and the fight goes continuously until one player runs out. It's pretty neat that this thing works on the N64 at all, like it's possible to load in 11 characters. I'm not sure if it's just because it's being emulated, but there wasn't a lengthy load time when picking the next character. Team Elimination Battle is Team Battle, but characters are only eliminated if they're finished off with an Ultra Combo. It's kinda gonna drag it out if you're not good at video games like me. Training is what it sounds like, a small tutorial mode. It's cool that it's there, especially for the game's age, but it's not a very good tutorial. Every segment has a 10-second timer, which is incredibly tight, and failing adds another 5 seconds of skipping the demonstration, so it gets tedious. Some of the combo strings are really specific and difficult and not useful too. It gets frustrating. Training also has difficulty options for some reason that limit the amount of retries for whatever reason, despite even arcade mode having no lives. It's really weird. Focus training just lets a player skip to one segment of the training. There's training segments on special moves, training sections on basic combos. Practice is a very bare-bones practice mode. It has no options, it's just an unmoving, invincible enemy to wail on and the ability to display one special move on screen at a time. It is functional for learning a few combos, but it's really bare-bones. There's also a bunch of options for the game overall. Some are default, like the amount of blood, while others are unlocked by defeating each difficulty or through a code. Usually weirder stuff like an invisibility mode, turning off blocking, and other modifiers. It's nice that the options are available, but most of them aren't significant enough to change much outside of turning off blocking, which makes the game a cakewalk. That's really all there is to Killer Instinct Gold. Like Killer Instinct 2 Classic, the game is decent fun, it's dated, and it's not robust enough to stand as a single-player game, nor is there a community for its multiplayer anymore, even less so considering it lacks 2 Classics online functionality. Despite the additional content, the extra stuff isn't really good enough to make Gold worth playing over 2, which looks significantly better and has online and stuff like that. I appreciate how far learning Gold took me to getting better at fighting games, but it's really not amazing. Killer Instinct 2 Classic is definitely the way to go if interested in these games.